Welcome to The Even Hand. This is her own story, in her own words. Frances Boyd had been a nurse for 20 years, and in all that time she'd held to one belief without ever quite saying it aloud. You look after the patient you can't see yet, the one who will be in the bed next week, on a shift you're not even working. You keep the ward safe for a stranger you'll never meet. She worked a busy medical ward at Wenhope NHS Foundation Trust in Leeds, a ward that ran, on paper, beautifully. Low incident rates, tidy paperwork, numbers that made a manager relax. Frances was the senior nurse on that floor, calm, unhurried, the one younger staff found at 3 a.m. when something went wrong. People said she never seemed rattled. They didn't see that the calm was mostly attention, noticing what everyone else was too tired to notice. It had never occurred to her that noticing might one day cost her the job she loved. Megan Doyle was 25, 4 months qualified, and still apologizing for taking up space. She was good, careful, quick to learn, but she'd hit the stage every new nurse hits where one bad week convinces you you're not cut out for it. Late one shift, Frances found her in the treatment room, close to tears. A medication error had surfaced that afternoon. A dose given late, caught before it reached the patient. Megan had been told, quietly, that it would be noted against her. Frances had been on the floor that afternoon. The error hadn't started with Megan. It had started 2 staff short, on a drug round no one could finish. And she knew, though she couldn't prove it yet, the near miss had been corrected on the spot and never entered onto the reporting system. As if catching it in time meant it had never happened. She sent Megan home, then sat in the empty treatment room, thinking how often she'd seen that and called it nothing. The next morning she raised it with the ward manager. Gillian Marsh had run the ward for 6 years and ran it well by the measures the trust cared about. She heard Frances out with a patience that never quite turned into agreement. The late dose had been dealt with, she said. Megan was capable and simply needed support. And reporting, she added gently, was a balance. Flag every near miss and you'd bury a good team in paperwork. A near miss you don't record, Frances said, is just a mistake you haven't made twice yet. Gillian smiled, said she'd keep an eye on it, and moved on to the bed numbers. It would have been easy to leave it there. Frances nearly did. Instead, a week later, she went to the Trust's Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, whose job is to make it safe for staff to raise concerns. The Guardian was kind, meant well, and just as plainly had 40 other things on her desk. She took notes, said she'd look into the reporting culture, and used the word appropriately more than once. 6 days later, an email arrived. It thanked Frances for raising a sensitive matter, confirmed conversations had taken place, and said the matter was being kept under review. Frances read the word twice, then closed it. On a ward, a review was what you did after a patient had already been harmed. It wasn't a word that prevented anything. She began, almost without deciding to, pulling the ward's incident logs from the past year. Nobody had asked her to. She called it thoroughness, and it wasn't only that. The gap between what she'd watched happen and what the system said had happened wouldn't let her sleep. What Frances found over several evenings wasn't one missing report. It was a pattern. Across 11 months, the recorded incident rate had fallen to almost nothing, not because fewer things went wrong, but because fewer were written down. She saw it when she set the logs against the handover and pharmacy records. Errors quietly fixed, near misses talked about at the desk and logged nowhere. And once, an error not caught in time. A patient harmed, recorded in the notes as a complication, never as a mistake. It wasn't a ward that had slipped under pressure. It was a ward that had learned month by month how to look safe by deciding in advance What counted as nothing? Frances sat with the logs open long after the floor had gone quiet. For 20 years, she'd trusted that if you did the work properly, the system held. She had done the work properly, and she understood, sitting there, that her own faith in it had been part of how it kept working. On patients who were not her, on a stranger in a bed she'd never see. She didn't go back to the Guardian. She went home and, over 2 evenings, wrote the whole thing out by hand. Dates, the logs, the gap between them, the patient recorded as a complication. Then she made a formal protected disclosure to the Care Quality Commission, the CQC, the regulator that decides whether a hospital is safe. Not Megan's late dose alone. The pattern, all 11 months of it. She told Megan before anyone else. Megan's first reaction was fear. For Frances more than for herself. Her second, after a long pause, neither of them filled, was steadier. For 4 months she'd believed she was the problem. Someone had just shown her, with evidence, that she wasn't. 5 weeks later, Frances was called to a meeting she assumed was about the disclosure. It wasn't. The trust had opened a disciplinary investigation into her. The framing was careful. Concerns about her conduct, about whether pulling those logs fell within her role. None of it touched what the logs showed. Her hours changed. Her clinical lead duties passed quietly to someone more junior. Nobody used the word demotion. It was a neutral process, she was told, again and again. The phrase used so often it began to sound like a door easing shut. When she asked whether any of it was connected to her going to the regulator, she was told the two matters were unrelated, in the flat way people repeat a line they've been handed. Then came the part that surprised even her. If she left, the trust might seek to recover the cost of her recent specialist training. Money she'd earned turned into a fence around the door. Frances resigned 3 weeks later. She could no longer trust her employer to keep patients or staff safe and wouldn't stay to be managed out for saying so. She packed her locker on a Sunday when the ward was quiet. A solicitor she instructed privately told her, in the careful way solicitors speak, that she had a strong case. The disciplinary landing so neatly after her disclosure pointed 2 ways: constructive dismissal and detriment for making a protected disclosure under the Employment Rights Act, 1996. Because the reason behind her treatment was that disclosure, any dismissal flowing from it, counted as automatically unfair, and that compensation, the solicitor noted, wasn't capped. The CQC, meanwhile, would look at the trust through its own powers, on its own clock. A separate matter running alongside that Frances had set moving but couldn't steer. The solicitor wouldn't promise an outcome, only that the case, in her words, was a good one. Before anything could be filed, Frances went through the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, ACAS, for early conciliation. A few weeks that felt, she said later, like a relative's room, waiting for news nobody wanted to carry in. It took 13 months. 13 months of written statements, of documents requested and slowly surrendered, of a hearing date that moved twice for reasons nobody fully explained. 13 months in which the ward carried on without her, and Gillian Marsh, as far as Frances could tell from a careful distance, carried on as before. What wore at her wasn't the waiting. It was the way the building had closed over the space where she'd been, the way water closes over a dropped stone. She kept nursing, agency shifts on other wards, in other towns. She was, it turned out, still very good at it. Around month 8, the CQC inspectors arrived on the ward. They hadn't told her they were coming. They didn't need to. The Care Quality Commission published its findings in the spring. The ward was rated inadequate, on safety and on how well it was led. Incidents were going unreported, inspectors found. Staff didn't feel able to raise concerns. The paperwork the trust was so proud of had hidden the state of the floor instead of showing it. The trust was served a formal warning notice, requiring significant improvement inside a set time. The report named no one. It didn't have to. Anyone who'd worked that ward could read it and find the 11 months Frances had written by hand in the regulator's flatter, heavier language. Megan messaged her the morning it went up. It wasn't long. In the end, they had to listen. Thank you for not letting it go. Frances read it once in her kitchen, then set the phone face down. There'd be time to feel it. First, the tribunal. At the employment tribunal, Frances was asked to describe, in her own words, what had happened. She didn't perform it. She didn't reach for a word larger than the facts required. She said this: "I'm a nurse. You write things down so the next person on shift knows what's true." They stopped writing things down and asked me to call that safe. I couldn't, so I told someone who could make them. That's the whole of it. The tribunal found for her on both counts: constructive dismissal, detriment for making a protected disclosure under the Employment Rights Act, 1996. Because her treatment had followed that disclosure, the dismissal was automatically unfair, and the compensation that would once have been limited was not limited here. The judgment was published in full. Gillian Marsh left the trust before the improvement deadline fell due. No announcement, no disgrace. A sideways move to another organization, the way people in trouble in the NHS often quietly go. Frances heard secondhand and found she felt no triumph, only a tired kind of recognition. Gillian hadn't been a monster. She'd been someone who decided long ago that a tidy board was worth more than an honest one, and stopped noticing she'd decided it. Megan stayed. She finished her preceptorship and put in for a move to a different ward. One she'd chosen, she admitted, over coffee, partly because its incident numbers ran high. She read that the right way round now. A ward that wrote things down was a ward that meant to put them right. Frances didn't get her ward back, and by the end, she wasn't sure she wanted it. What she got instead was worth more. A finding, official and on the record, that what she'd seen had been real. That saying so had been right, not in spite of the cost, but regardless of it. She nurses in a different city now. The work is the same and so is she, a steady hand, an eye on the thing nobody else has time to notice. The real change is quieter, and it fits no record. She used to think a calm ward was a safe ward. Now she knows calm can be a thing you build by looking away. That the quiet she'd trusted had been bought with people she never saw, on shifts she never worked. She thinks sometimes about the patient recorded as a complication. That case was never reopened. But the regulator knows now, and the next person in that bed is a little safer for it. That was the point. Not her name, not even her job. Just the patient she'd never meet, kept safe by a stranger who refused to look away. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more.